The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as 9-year-old Princess Charlotte walked through the rose garden with her governess Miss Sarah. It was supposed to be a quiet Tuesday, just another day of lessons and play before the royal family's upcoming public appearance at the children's charity event. Charlotte loved these peaceful moments in the garden, where she could forget about the constant eyes watching her every move and simply be a child picking flowers. Charlotte had always been different from her brothers. While Prince George was serious and thoughtful, and Prince Louis was full of energy and mischief, Charlotte possessed a quiet confidence that reminded everyone of her great-grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth. She moved with a grace beyond her years, yet still maintained the curiosity and wonder of childhood. Today she wore a simple blue dress with white flowers, her hair tied back in a neat ponytail that bounced as she walked. Miss Sarah watched Charlotte carefully as the young princess bent down to smell a particularly beautiful pink rose. The governess had been with the family for 3 years now, and she had grown genuinely fond of all 3 children. But there was something special about Charlotte. The girl had an inner strength that shone through even in quiet moments like this. She was intelligent, asking thoughtful questions about everything from history to science, and she had a natural empathy that drew people to her. "Miss Sarah, do you think the roses know we're here?" Charlotte asked, her voice soft and curious as she gently touched a petal. The question was typical of Charlotte, always wondering about the world around her, always thinking beyond the obvious. "What makes you ask that, Your Royal Highness?"
Miss Sarah replied, using the formal address even in their private moments as protocol demanded.
"Well, they seem to stand up straighter when we walk by, and this one here," Charlotte pointed to a particularly tall rose bush, "it's leaning toward us like it wants to say hello." Miss Sarah smiled at the child's imagination. Even surrounded by the formality of royal life, Charlotte maintained a sense of wonder that made her teaching duties a joy rather than a burden.
The governess had worked with children from wealthy families before, but none quite like the Cambridge children. They were remarkably normal despite their extraordinary circumstances. The garden was Charlotte's favorite place at Windsor. Here, among the carefully tended flowers and ancient oak trees, she could pretend she was just any other child exploring nature. The high stone walls that surrounded the castle grounds usually made her feel safe and protected, but today, something felt different. There was a tension in the air that she couldn't quite understand, like the feeling before a thunderstorm. Unknown to Charlotte, several miles away, a man named Marcus Webb sat in his small flat staring at photographs spread across his kitchen table. The pictures showed the royal family at various public events, but his focus was entirely on Princess Charlotte. Marcus had been watching the family for months, studying their routines, their security arrangements, their public appearances. He had convinced himself that he was destined to be part of their lives, that Princess Charlotte needed him to protect her from the dangers of the world. Marcus was not well. His mind had been deteriorating for months, fueled by an obsession that had started innocently enough with admiration for the royal family, but had grown into something dark and dangerous. He believed that he understood Charlotte better than anyone else, that he could see threats to her safety that others missed. In his twisted thinking, he had appointed himself as her true protector, and today he had decided it was time to act. The security team at Windsor Castle went about their morning routines with their usual professionalism, but they were always alert.
Chief Inspector David Morrison had been protecting the royal family for over 15 years, and he knew that threats could come from anywhere at any time. His team monitored every entrance, every visitor, every delivery truck that approached the castle. They had detailed files on known risks and maintained constant communication with other security agencies. Inspector Morrison prided himself on being 3 steps ahead of any potential threat. His officers were positioned strategically around the grounds, some visible to deter casual troublemakers, others hidden to catch more serious threats. Today felt like any other day, but Morrison had learned never to let his guard down. The safety of the royal family, especially the children, was his primary responsibility, and he took that duty very seriously.
In the rose garden, Charlotte continued her exploration, unaware of the elaborate security measures that surrounded her daily life.
She had grown up with bodyguards and security protocols, so they seemed as natural to her as breathing. The discreet earpieces worn by nearby staff, the careful positioning of personnel, the subtle but constant communication between team members. It was all invisible to her, just part of the background of her world. "Your Royal Highness, perhaps we should head back inside for your French lesson," Miss Sarah suggested, glancing at her watch. The daily schedule was carefully planned, and staying on time was important for maintaining the structure that helped the children thrive despite their unusual circumstances. "Just a few more minutes, please?" Charlotte asked, her eyes sparkling with the hope that only a child can muster. "I want to count all the different colors of roses. I'm up to 7 different shades of pink alone." Miss Sarah couldn't help but smile at the child's enthusiasm.
"Very well, but..."
Just 5 more minutes. Your mother will want to hear about your discoveries when she returns from London this afternoon.
Princess Catherine had been in London for official duties related to her patronage of several children's charities. She was expected back at Windsor by tea time, and Charlotte was excited to share her garden observations with her mother.
The bond between Catherine and Charlotte was particularly strong, with the young princess often serving as a bridge between her more reserved older brother and her exuberant younger brother. As Charlotte continued her flower counting, neither she nor Miss Sarah noticed the figure moving carefully along the outer perimeter of the castle grounds.
Marcus Webb had spent weeks studying the security patterns, timing the guards' movements, identifying the blind spots in the surveillance system. He was dressed in maintenance coveralls he had stolen from a legitimate service company, and he carried tools and identification that would pass a casual inspection.
Marcus believed he was on a rescue mission. In his disturbed mind, Princess Charlotte was in constant danger from people who didn't truly understand her needs.
He saw threats everywhere, in the crowds at public events, in the staff who worked at the castle, even in her own family. He had convinced himself that only he could provide the protection she truly needed, and he had spent months planning this moment.
The castle's outer security detected an anomaly in their monitoring systems, but it was subtle enough to be attributed to a minor technical glitch. Marcus had studied electronic security for years, teaching himself just enough to create small disruptions without triggering major alarms.
He moved slowly and carefully, using the maintenance tunnels that connected various parts of the castle's infrastructure. Meanwhile, in London, Queen Camilla was finishing her own morning engagements when she received a routine security briefing.
Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but she had developed an instinct over the years for sensing when something wasn't quite right.
She had grown particularly protective of her step-grandchildren, understanding the unique pressures they faced growing up in the public eye.
Camilla remembered her own adjustment to royal life, the constant scrutiny, the way every action was analyzed and criticized. She was determined to help shield the children from the worst of it while still preparing them for their future roles. Charlotte in particular reminded Camilla of herself at that age, strong-willed but thoughtful, curious about the world, but already aware that her life would be different from others. Back at Windsor, Charlotte had finished counting roses and was now collecting fallen petals to press in her nature journal.
Miss Sarah watched her carefully, noting how the child's natural grace made even the simple act of gathering flower petals look elegant. It was moments like these that reminded the governess why she loved working with the royal family despite the challenges and pressures.
This is the book. It's about histories. The first sign that something was wrong came from the castle's main security center. A technician noticed an irregularity in one of the perimeter sensors, just a brief signal that suggested someone or something had passed through an area that should have been empty. It could have been an animal, a falling branch, or simply equipment malfunction, but protocol required investigation. Chief Inspector Morrison was immediately notified of the anomaly. His years of experience had taught him that seemingly minor irregularities often preceded major incidents.
He quickly dispatched 2 officers to investigate the area while maintaining normal security positions elsewhere. The last thing he wanted was to create panic over what might be nothing, but he also couldn't afford to ignore any potential threat. Charlotte looked up from her petal collection as she heard footsteps approaching. She expected to see one of the familiar security officers, or perhaps a gardener, but instead saw a maintenance worker she didn't recognize. This wasn't unusual. Many people worked on the castle grounds whom she didn't know personally, but something about the man's behavior seemed strange.
"Hello," Charlotte said politely, as she had been taught to greet everyone she encountered.
Even at 9 years old, she understood the importance of being gracious and kind to all the people who worked to maintain her family's homes. Marcus Webb stopped in his tracks when he heard her voice.
After months of planning and watching from a distance, he was finally face to face with the child he believed he was destined to protect. In his disturbed mind, this moment felt like destiny. Like everything in his life had led to this encounter.
"Princess Charlotte," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I've been waiting so long to meet you. I'm here to keep you safe." Miss Sarah immediately sensed danger. The man's tone, his intense stare, the way he spoke directly to Charlotte without acknowledging her presence or following any protocol. Everything about the situation felt wrong. She stepped closer to Charlotte, her hand instinctively reaching for the panic button hidden in her jacket pocket. "I'm sorry, but you shouldn't be in this area," Miss Sarah said firmly, trying to keep her voice calm and steady. "I'll need to see your authorization to be here." Marcus ignored the governess completely, his focus entirely on Charlotte. "You don't understand," he said, his voice growing more agitated. "There are people who want to hurt her. I've seen them. I know about them. Only I can protect her properly." Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. She had been taught about stranger danger and inappropriate behavior, and everything about this encounter felt wrong. The man's eyes had a wild look that frightened her, and his words didn't make sense. She trusted Miss Sarah completely and moved closer to her governess. Miss Sarah pressed the panic button while maintaining eye contact with the intruder. Within seconds, silent alarms would be sounding throughout the castle's security center, and help would be on the way. But she knew it might take precious minutes for security to reach their location in the garden, and she had to protect Charlotte until they arrived.
"Charlotte, dear," Miss Sarah said quietly, "I think we should go back to the castle now. Your French lesson is about to begin." But Marcus stepped forward, blocking their path to the main walkway.
"No," he said, his voice becoming more desperate. "You don't understand. They're not keeping her safe. I have to take her somewhere secure, somewhere they can't find her." The full horror of the situation became clear to Miss Sarah. This wasn't just an overzealous fan or a confused maintenance worker. This was someone who intended to take Charlotte away from the castle, away from her family, and everyone who truly cared for her safety.
The governess felt a surge of protective instinct stronger than anything she had ever experienced.
Charlotte, despite her fear, showed the remarkable composure that would serve her well throughout her life. She didn't scream or panic, but instead moved even closer to Miss Sarah and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm perfectly safe here with Miss Sarah. Perhaps you should speak with security about your concerns." Her calm response seemed to confuse Marcus, whose delusions had convinced him that Charlotte would recognize him as her true protector and come with him willingly. The rational part of his mind, the part that was still capable of recognizing reality, briefly surfaced as he looked at the frightened but composed child before him.
"The Bedelia's back up the frightened but composed child before him."
In the castle security center, red lights began flashing on the monitoring board as Miss Sarah's panic signal was received. Chief Inspector Morrison was at the center within 30 seconds, his training and experience immediately taking control of the situation.
He could see from the location tracker that the signal was coming from the Rose Garden where Princess Charlotte was supposed to be having her supervised outdoor time. "Team Alpha, Code Orange, Rose Garden Sector 7. Morrison spoke quickly into his radio.
Code Orange meant immediate threat to a principal, in this case Princess Charlotte. Within moments, armed officers were moving swiftly but quietly toward the garden, taking positions that would allow them to assess and neutralize any threat without putting the princess in additional danger. Morrison pulled up the garden's security cameras on his monitors, but the Rose Garden had been deliberately designed with limited surveillance to give the royal children some privacy during their outdoor activities. What he could see showed three figures: Charlotte, Miss Sarah, and an unknown male who appeared to be dressed as maintenance staff.
This is the book. It's about history.
The man was positioned between the governess and child and the main path back to the castle.
"Sir, we have no record of any scheduled maintenance in that sector today," reported Sergeant Williams, the security coordinator.
All authorized personnel are accounted for elsewhere on the grounds. Morrison felt his chest tighten with concern. In 15 years of protecting the royal family, this was exactly the kind of scenario that kept security professionals awake at night.
An unknown individual had somehow breached multiple layers of security and was now in direct contact with one of the children.
Every second that passed increased the potential for the situation to escalate. Back in the garden, Marcus Webb was becoming increasingly agitated as reality began to clash with his delusions. Charlotte's calm demeanor and Miss Sarah's protective stance were not fitting the narrative he had created in his mind. He had expected Charlotte to recognize him as her savior, to understand that he was there to rescue her from the dangers that others couldn't see.
"You don't understand," Marcus repeated, his voice rising. "I've been watching, I've been planning."
There are threats everywhere. The people who are supposed to protect you don't really understand what you need. Miss Sarah kept herself positioned between Marcus and Charlotte, her mind racing through possible escape routes. The Rose Garden was beautiful but isolated, surrounded by high hedges that provided privacy but now felt like barriers trapping them with this unstable man. She could hear movement in the nearby shrubbery and hoped it was security approaching, but she couldn't risk looking away from Marcus. Charlotte's young mind was processing the situation with remarkable clarity. She had been raised understanding that her position came with certain risks, though her parents had tried to shield her from the more frightening realities. She knew that people sometimes became obsessed with the royal family in unhealthy ways, and she was beginning to realize that this man might be one of those people. "What's your name?" Charlotte asked Marcus, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. She had been taught that sometimes engaging with someone directly could help calm a tense situation, though she had never imagined needing to use this knowledge at age 9. The question seemed to surprise Marcus.
My name is Marcus Webb, he said, and for a moment his voice became almost normal. I work in computer security. I've been studying your family's protection systems for months. I know where the weaknesses are. This admission sent chills through Miss Sarah. If this man had been studying the castle's security systems, he was far more dangerous than a simple obsessed fan. He had been planning this encounter, possibly planning to take Charlotte somewhere else entirely. She pressed her panic button again, hoping to send additional urgency signals to the security team. Officer James Patterson was the first security team member to reach the outer edge of the Rose Garden. Through his earpiece, he could hear Chief Inspector Morrison coordinating the response while trying to gather more information about the intruder. Patterson had been trained for exactly this type of situation, but knowing that a child, especially Princess Charlotte, was involved, made every decision more critical. Patterson could see the three figures through a gap in the hedge. The unknown man appeared agitated but wasn't displaying any visible weapons. Miss Sarah was clearly trying to keep herself between the man and Charlotte, while the princess herself seemed remarkably composed for a child in such a frightening situation. Patterson knew he had to wait for backup before making any move that might escalate the confrontation.
I can see the situation, Patterson reported quietly into his radio.
One adult male, approximately 6 feet tall, brown hair, wearing blue maintenance coveralls. He appears to be talking to the princess and her governess. No visible weapons, but his body language suggests high stress levels.
Morrison was coordinating the response from the security center while simultaneously preparing to notify the senior royal family members.
Protocol required that both Prince William and Princess Catherine be informed immediately of any threat to their children, regardless of how the situation might ultimately resolve.
Meanwhile, in London, Queen Camilla had finished her morning appointments and was preparing for lunch when her private secretary approached with an unusual request. Your Majesty, Chief Inspector Morrison at Windsor needs to speak with you urgently regarding a security matter involving Princess Charlotte. Camilla felt her heart skip a beat. In her years as part of the royal family, she had learned that urgent security calls rarely brought good news. She immediately took the phone, her mind already racing through possibilities, and preparing for whatever action might be needed. Inspector Morrison, what's the situation? She asked, her voice calm but firm. Your Majesty, we have an unknown individual who has gained access to the Rose Garden where Princess Charlotte was having outdoor time with her governess. The situation is contained, and we're moving to resolve it, but I wanted you to be aware immediately.
Camilla closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of Charlotte's sweet face and her remarkable maturity for such a young child.
What do you need from me, Inspector? At this point, ma'am, we're handling the immediate situation. But depending on how this develops, we may need to consider adjustments to upcoming public appearances.
Yep.
The individual appears to have been planning this encounter for some time.
In the garden, Marcus was becoming more agitated as the conversation continued.
His delusions were being challenged by the reality of actually speaking with Charlotte, who was not responding as he had imagined she would. The calm confidence she displayed was confusing him, making him question some of his assumptions while simultaneously making him more desperate to prove his point.
You need to come with me, Marcus said suddenly, reaching toward Charlotte.
I have a safe place prepared. Somewhere they can't find you. Somewhere you'll be truly protected. Miss Sarah immediately stepped forward, placing herself directly between Marcus's outstretched hand and Charlotte. Stay back, she said firmly. You need to leave this area immediately. The physical movement toward Charlotte triggered something in Marcus's deteriorating mental state. His delusion that he was protecting her clashed violently with the reality that he was frightening her, creating a dangerous instability in his behavior. His breathing became rapid and his movements more erratic. Charlotte could sense the change in the man's demeanor, and for the first time she felt genuine fear. But rather than panic, she drew on the lessons her parents had taught her about remaining calm in difficult situations. She also remembered something her great-grandmother had once told her about the importance of treating everyone with dignity, even when afraid. Mr. Webb, she said, using his name to try to establish a human connection, I can see that you're worried about my safety, and I appreciate that you care. But Miss Sarah and I really do need to go back to the castle now. Perhaps you could speak with our security team about your concerns. Her words, spoken with such maturity and kindness, seemed to penetrate through some of Marcus's confusion. For a moment, he saw not the symbol of royalty he had been obsessing over, but a real child. A frightened but brave 9-year-old girl who was trying to handle a terrifying situation with grace beyond her years. Officer Patterson, watching from his concealed position, saw Marcus's moment of hesitation and knew this might be the best opportunity for intervention. He signaled to his backup, Officer Reynolds, who had taken position on the opposite side of the garden.
They had trained for this exact scenario: how to safely extract a principal from a confrontation with a mentally unstable individual. "This is Patterson," he whispered into his radio. Subject appears momentarily disoriented, requesting permission to approach. Morrison, watching through the limited camera angles available, made the difficult decision.
Negative, Patterson. Hold position.
"We have additional units 60 seconds out. Do not engage unless there's immediate physical threat." Those 60 seconds felt like hours to everyone involved. Marcus stood frozen, torn between his delusions and the reality of the frightened child before him. Miss Sarah remained alert and protective, ready to physically defend Charlotte if necessary. And Charlotte herself continued to display the remarkable composure that would define her character throughout her life.
If you wet...
The silence was broken when Marcus suddenly spoke again, his voice now filled with confusion and growing distress. "This isn't how it was supposed to happen. You were supposed to understand. You were supposed to need my help."
"I do understand that you want to help," Charlotte replied gently, "but the best way to help me right now would be to let Miss Sarah and me go back to the castle.
"My parents will be worried if I'm late."
The mention of her parents seemed to trigger another shift in Marcus's mental state.
His obsession had focused so intensely on Charlotte herself that he had somehow lost sight of the fact that she was part of a loving family. The reality of her relationships with her parents and brothers began to penetrate his delusions, causing him visible distress.
Miss Sarah could see that Marcus was becoming increasingly unstable, and she knew that this phase of the confrontation could be the most dangerous. When people with severe mental health issues began to have their delusions challenged by reality, they sometimes became unpredictable and potentially violent.
She made a decision that would later be praised by security experts. Rather than waiting passively for help to arrive, she began slowly moving herself and Charlotte toward the nearest gap in the hedge, speaking calmly to Marcus as she did so.
"Mr. Webb, I can see that you're upset, and that's understandable.
These situations can be very confusing, but what Princess Charlotte needs most right now is to feel safe and to know that the people who love her are nearby." Her words were carefully chosen to reinforce reality while acknowledging Marcus's emotional state. As they moved, she could see shapes moving in the nearby foliage, and knew that security was finally in position to act if necessary.
Officer Patterson received the signal from Chief Inspector Morrison that additional units were now in position around the garden. 3 more armed officers had quietly surrounded the area, each with clear sightlines to Marcus Webb while ensuring Princess Charlotte remained protected. The Gouda mess was unprofitable.
The delicate operation required precision timing to avoid escalating the situation while ensuring the princess's safety. Marcus Webb was now showing clear signs of mental breakdown. The collision between his elaborate delusions and the reality of the situation was causing visible distress. His hands shook as he ran them through his hair, and he began pacing in small circles, muttering to himself about protection plans and hidden dangers that existed only in his troubled mind.
"They don't see what I see," Marcus said, his voice growing more desperate. "The threats are everywhere. The people at the charity event next week. I've seen the guest list. There are dangerous people who will be there. Politicians with hidden agendas, business people with connections to hostile nations. Princess Charlotte will be exposed. Vulnerable."
Miss Sarah realized that Marcus had somehow gained access to detailed information about upcoming royal engagements. This was far more serious than a simple obsession. He had been conducting surveillance and research that threatened not just Charlotte, but potentially the entire royal family. She continued her slow movement toward the hedge opening while keeping Marcus talking.
What specific threats have you identified, Mr. Savage?
"Webb?" Miss Sarah asked, hoping to keep him focused on explaining his delusions rather than taking any physical action. "Perhaps you could share your concerns with the proper authorities."
Charlotte, despite her fear, was listening carefully to the conversation.
Even at 9 years old, she understood that this man had been watching her family and knew details about their private lives that he shouldn't have.
The realization that someone had been studying them, learning their routines, and planning this encounter made her feel violated in a way she had never experienced before.
In London, Queen Camilla had cancelled her lunch engagement and was coordinating with her security team to travel immediately to Windsor Castle. Her protective instincts regarding her step-grandchildren had been triggered, and she wanted to be present to provide whatever support might be needed. She also knew that Princess Catherine was still in London completing her charity obligations, and would need to be informed about the situation. "Have we reached the Princess of Wales?" Camilla asked her private secretary.
"Yes, Your Majesty. Her Royal Highness is leaving her engagement immediately and will meet you at Windsor."
Prince William is being contacted at his current location. Camilla felt a mix of admiration and concern as she thought about how Catherine and William would handle this crisis. They had always been determined to give their children as normal a life as possible while still preparing them for their future roles. But incidents like this served as stark reminders of the unique dangers their family faced.
Back at Windsor Castle, Chief Inspector Morrison was making rapid decisions about how to safely resolve the confrontation.
His experience told him that Marcus Webb was becoming increasingly unstable, and the longer the situation continued, the greater the risk became. However, any aggressive action by security could trigger an unpredictable response that might put Charlotte in greater danger.
Patterson, what's your assessment of subject's current state? Morrison asked through the radio. Sir, subject appears to be experiencing significant mental distress. His speech is becoming more rapid and disjointed. He's showing signs of paranoid thinking and appears to believe his delusions completely. I don't think he fully understands that his actions are threatening the princess. This assessment confirmed Morrison's worst fears.
Individuals experiencing psychotic episodes could be extremely dangerous because their behavior was driven by internal logic that bore no relationship to reality. Marcus genuinely believed he was protecting Charlotte, which meant he might be willing to take extreme measures to accomplish what he saw as his mission. In the garden, Marcus suddenly stopped pacing and focused intently on Charlotte again.
You have to understand, he said, his voice becoming more urgent.
Next week at the charity event, there will be over 200 people in attendance. I've researched every single one of them.
At least 15 have connections to organizations that oppose the monarchy.
3 have business relationships with companies from countries that don't support British interests. Charlotte felt overwhelmed by the intensity of his stare and the detailed nature of his concerns. She could see that he truly believed what he was saying, which somehow made the situation more frightening than if he had simply been lying or pretending. This man had spent months thinking about her safety, creating elaborate theories about threats to her well-being.
Mr. Webb, Charlotte said, her voice remaining steady despite her fear. I appreciate that you're concerned about my family's safety, but we have very good people who work to protect us. They check all these things very carefully.
Her response triggered another wave of agitation in Marcus. No, he said loudly, causing Miss Sarah to instinctively step closer to Charlotte.
They think they're doing a good job, but they miss things. They don't see the patterns like I do.
They don't understand how all the pieces fit together.
Officer Patterson could see that the situation was deteriorating rapidly.
Marcus's voice was rising, his movements becoming more erratic, and his focus on Charlotte was becoming more intense. Through his earpiece, he heard Morrison's voice.
All units, prepare for immediate intervention on my command.
Priority is principal's safety. Miss Sarah knew they had run out of time for gradual de-escalation. Marcus was working himself into a state where he might try to grab Charlotte and carry out whatever plan he had developed. She made a split-second decision that demonstrated both her bravery and her deep love for the child she was protecting. Charlotte, when I say run, you go straight through that gap in the hedge and don't stop until you reach the castle, Miss Sarah whispered quickly. But Marcus heard her words and his delusions immediately interpreted this as confirmation of the threat he believed he was protecting Charlotte from.
No!
He shouted, lunging forward. You're part of it. You're trying to take her back to where the danger is. In that moment, several things happened simultaneously. Miss Sarah threw herself between Marcus and Charlotte, absorbing the impact as he reached for the princess. Officer Patterson burst through the hedge, his weapon drawn but not aimed, shouting commands for Marcus to stop. Charlotte, following Miss Sarah's instructions, ran toward the castle as fast as her young legs could carry her. Marcus, now completely lost in his delusions, believed that Charlotte was being taken away from his protection and into mortal danger. He struggled with Miss Sarah, not intending to hurt her, but desperate to reach Charlotte before she disappeared. His years of studying the castle security systems had included learning the locations of safe rooms and alternate exits, and he believed he could get Charlotte to safety if he could just reach her. Princess Charlotte, come back! I'm trying to help you, Marcus called out as Officer Patterson approached with backup arriving from multiple directions. Charlotte could hear Marcus calling her name as she ran, and the sound filled her with a terror she had never experienced before. This wasn't the vague, distant danger that her security training had prepared her for. This was immediate, personal, and completely overwhelming. She could hear shouting behind her, but she followed Miss Sarah's instructions and didn't look back. As Charlotte reached the main path leading to the castle, she saw additional security officers running toward the garden. One of them immediately recognized her and diverted to escort her safely inside while his colleagues continued toward the confrontation. Charlotte's legs felt weak with relief when she saw the familiar face of Sergeant Williams, someone she had known for years. Princess Charlotte, are you hurt? Sergeant Williams asked as he gently guided her toward the castle entrance. I'm okay, Charlotte managed to say, though her voice was shaking for the first time. But Miss Sarah, she's still back there with that man. He was saying things about protecting me,
but he was scaring me. William spoke into his radio while continuing to escort Charlotte to safety.
Principal is secure and unharmed. Second is a personnel and...
Proceeding to safe room. Confirm status of secondary individual.
Inside the castle, Charlotte was taken to a specially designed safe room where she could be completely protected while the situation in the garden was resolved. The room was comfortable and welcoming, designed not to feel like a prison but to provide absolute security. Charlotte sat on a soft couch, still processing what had just happened to her. For the first time in her young life, Charlotte truly understood what it meant to be a target. The man in the garden hadn't wanted to hurt her. In his twisted way, he had wanted to help her, but the result had been the same. She felt vulnerable and exposed in a way that no amount of security training could have prepared her for. Back in the garden, Officer Patterson and his team had successfully subdued Marcus Webb without anyone being seriously injured. Marcus was clearly experiencing a complete break from reality, alternately begging them to let him protect Charlotte and warning them about the elaborate conspiracy he believed threatened her safety.
Miss Sarah had minor bruises from their brief struggle, but was otherwise unharmed.
Medical team to Rose Garden. Morrison commanded through the radio.
We need both physical and psychiatric assessment of subject immediately. As Marcus was being restrained and prepared for transport to a secure medical facility, he continued his desperate pleas.
You don't understand. The charity event.
She'll be in danger. I have all the research. I can show you the connections. Miss Sarah watched as the disturbed man was led away, feeling a complex mix of pity and revulsion. She could see that Marcus was genuinely ill, that his mind had created an elaborate fantasy in which he was Charlotte's protector.
But regardless of his intentions, he had terrorized a 9-year-old child and violated the security of her home. The governess was shaken by how quickly the situation had escalated and how helpless she had felt to protect Charlotte from the psychological trauma of the encounter.
Physical safety was one thing, but the fear and confusion that Marcus had caused would likely stay with Charlotte for a long time. Chief Inspector Morrison arrived at the garden as Marcus was being taken away.
His immediate priority was ensuring that no other threats remained and conducting a full security review to understand how this breach had occurred. But he also knew that the royal family would need immediate briefings about what had happened and what measures were being taken to prevent any recurrence.
Miss Sarah, are you injured? Morrison asked as he approached the governess.
I'm fine, Inspector.
A few bruises, nothing serious. But Princess Charlotte, she handled herself remarkably well. But she was clearly frightened.
This kind of encounter, it changes something for a child. Morrison nodded grimly. He had seen how security incidents affected the royal children, how they lost some of their natural confidence and joy when confronted with evidence of the dangerous obsessions their existence could inspire in unstable individuals.
It was one of the most heartbreaking aspects of his job.
Queen Camilla arrived at Windsor Castle within an hour of receiving the initial call about Charlotte's safety. Her car swept through the gates as security teams conducted additional perimeter checks to ensure no other threats remained. Despite her years of royal training in maintaining composure during crises, Camilla felt genuine fear for her step-granddaughter's well-being, both physical and emotional. Camilla had lived through security scares before, but threats involving the children always affected her more deeply.
She remembered her own stepchildren's younger years, how incidents like this could shake a child's fundamental sense of safety in the world. Charlotte was particularly sensitive and thoughtful, qualities that made her special, but also potentially more vulnerable to lasting trauma from such an encounter.
As Camilla entered the castle, Chief Inspector Morrison met her immediately with a full briefing.
Your Majesty, Princess Charlotte is physically unharmed and secure in the family quarters.
The perpetrator has been taken into custody and appears to be experiencing significant mental health issues. We're conducting a complete security review to determine how this breach occurred.
I want to see Charlotte immediately,
Camilla said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, but also the concern of a grandmother figure who genuinely cared for the child's well-being.
In the safe room, Charlotte sat quietly, her usual animated demeanor subdued by the morning's events.
She had been offered snacks and entertainment, but she seemed more interested in simply sitting and processing what had happened. When Camilla entered, Charlotte's face showed immediate relief at seeing a familiar, beloved family member.
Grandmama, Charlotte said, using her special name for Camilla as she stood up from the couch.
Despite her royal training, she was still very much a 9-year-old child who needed comfort after a frightening experience. Camilla immediately wrapped Charlotte in a warm embrace, feeling the child's small body trembling slightly despite her outward composure.
My darling girl, I'm so proud of how brave you were today. Are you hurt at all?
I'm not hurt, Charlotte replied, her voice muffled against Camilla's shoulder.
But Grandmama, that man knew things about our family.
He knew about the charity event next week, and he had been watching us.
It made me feel strange, like someone has been looking at me when I didn't know it. Camilla's heart ached for Charlotte's loss of innocence. The realization that strangers might be watching and studying their private lives was one of the harsh realities of royal existence, but 9 years old seemed far too young for such awareness. She held Charlotte closer, wishing she could protect her from all the difficulties that lay ahead.
Charlotte, some people become confused about our family and think they need to interfere in our lives. But that doesn't change the fact that you are safe and loved and that we have excellent people working to protect you always.
Meanwhile, Princess Catherine had arrived from London, her face pale with worry as she was briefed on the situation. As a mother, her first instinct was to rush to her daughter. But as a member of the royal family, she understood the importance of getting complete information before taking any action that might affect ongoing security measures.
"Where is she now?" Catherine asked Chief Inspector Morrison as they walked quickly through the castle corridors. "She's with Her Majesty Queen Camilla in the family quarters, Your Royal Highness." Princess Charlotte showed remarkable composure throughout the incident, but she was clearly frightened. "We've arranged for trauma counseling if needed."
Catherine nodded, her mind already racing through the implications of what had happened. As parents, she and William had always known this day might come, the day when their children would directly encounter the darker side of public fascination with their family.
They had prepared as much as possible, but no amount of preparation could fully shield a child from the emotional impact of such an experience. When Catherine entered the room where Charlotte sat with Camilla, she immediately knelt down to her daughter's level, her eyes scanning Charlotte's face for any signs of distress or injury.
"My sweetheart, are you all right?" Charlotte looked at her mother with eyes that seemed older than they had been that morning.
Mummy, the man said he had been studying our security and watching our family for months.
How long has he been watching me without me knowing? The question broke Catherine's heart. Charlotte had always been perceptive and thoughtful, but now she was grappling with concepts that no child should have to consider.
The idea that someone had been secretly observing her, learning her routines, and planning this encounter would naturally make any person feel violated and unsafe. "We don't know exactly, darling," Catherine answered honestly.
"But what I do know is that our security team caught him, and they're making sure this can never happen again. And most importantly, you are safe now." Prince William arrived shortly after Catherine, having canceled his own engagements to rush to Windsor. When he saw his daughter safe in the family quarters, his relief was visible, but his anger at the security breach was equally apparent. As both a father and future king, he understood that this incident would require significant changes to how his family's security was managed. Charlotte noticed her father's tension immediately. Despite her young age, she was sensitive to the emotions of the adults around her, and she could see that this event had affected not just her but her entire family. "Papa, are you angry with me?" "Oh, Charlotte," William said, immediately softening his expression as he joined Catherine in kneeling beside their daughter.
"I could never be angry with you. You did everything right today."
"I'm very proud of how you handled such a scary situation."
But Charlotte wasn't entirely satisfied with this answer.
Her quick mind was already working through the implications of what had happened. Will this change things for our family?
Will we have to stop doing public events because of people like him? The question demonstrated Charlotte's mature understanding of her family's role and responsibilities.
Even at 9, she was beginning to grasp that their public duties came with personal risks, and she was worried that her frightening encounter might limit their ability to serve the public in the way they had always done.
Camilla exchanged glances with William and Catherine, recognizing that Charlotte's question went to the heart of royal existence, the constant balance between public service and personal safety. They all knew that Charlotte would face these challenges throughout her life, but seeing her grapple with them so young was heartbreaking.
"Charlotte, our family has been serving the public for many generations," Camilla said gently. "There have always been challenges and occasionally people who become confused about their role in our lives.
But we don't let those few people stop us from doing the important work we're meant to do." Miss Sarah was also present for part of this family discussion, having insisted on staying to ensure Charlotte's continued well-being despite her own shaken state. The governess had developed a deep bond with Charlotte over their years together, and she felt partially responsible for not preventing the encounter, even though security experts would later confirm that she had handled the situation perfectly.
Your Royal Highness, Miss Sarah said to Charlotte, "I want you to know that what happened today was not normal, and it's not something you should expect to happen again."
Mr. Webb was sick in his mind, and sick people sometimes do things that don't make sense to the rest of us.
Charlotte considered this explanation carefully.
Miss Sarah, when he said he was trying to protect me, did he really believe that?
The question showed Charlotte's remarkable empathy and emotional intelligence.
Even after being frightened and threatened, she was trying to understand Marcus Webb's perspective and motivations. This capacity for compassion, even toward someone who had caused her distress, would serve her well throughout her future life in the public eye.
Yes, I believe he did think he was helping you, Miss Sarah replied honestly. But sometimes when people are sick in their minds, they can't tell the difference between helping and hurting.
That's why it's so important to stay close to the people who truly do keep you safe. Chief Inspector Morrison requested a private meeting with the adult family members to discuss immediate security enhancements and long-term adjustments to Charlotte's protection protocols.
The fact that Marcus Webb had gained detailed knowledge of royal schedules and security procedures suggested systemic vulnerabilities that needed immediate attention. The individual had sophisticated knowledge of our systems and upcoming events, Morrison explained to the family.
We're conducting a complete review of information security and staff vetting procedures.
In the immediate term, I'm recommending enhanced protection for all family members and temporary adjustments to public appearances. William nodded grimly.
Whatever you think is necessary, Inspector. But I want Charlotte to understand that this isn't her fault, and that it won't fundamentally change how our family operates. She's already starting to worry about the impact on our public duties. As the day continued, Charlotte gradually returned to some semblance of normalcy, though the adults around her could see subtle changes in her demeanor. She was more alert to her surroundings, more conscious of the security personnel who were always present, more aware of the fact that her family's life was fundamentally different from other people's lives. That evening, as Charlotte prepared for bed, she had one more conversation with her mother that revealed how much the day's events had affected her understanding of her place in the world. Mummy, when I grow up and have to do more royal duties, will there always be people like Mr. Webb watching me? Catherine struggled to find words that were both honest and reassuring. Charlotte, most people who are interested in our family are kind and supportive. People like Mr. Webb are very rare, and we have excellent people working to make sure they can't hurt us. But yes, being part of our family means that people will always be interested in what we do. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment processing this information. I understand, Mummy. And I know that our work is important, even if it's sometimes scary. Grandmama told me that being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing what's right even when you are afraid.
Catherine felt overwhelming pride in her daughter's maturity and resilience.
Despite the trauma of the morning's events, Charlotte was already beginning to integrate the experience into her understanding of her role and responsibilities.
It was a harsh lesson for such a young child, but Charlotte was handling it with grace and wisdom beyond her years. The security review that followed Marcus Webb's arrest revealed significant improvements needed in information security and threat assessment.
Webb had exploited several weaknesses in the system, demonstrating a level of sophistication that concerned security experts. His detailed knowledge of royal schedules and personnel had been gathered through a combination of public sources, social media monitoring, and what appeared to be assistance from someone with inside access. Queen Camilla took a special interest in ensuring that Charlotte received appropriate support in processing the emotional impact of the incident. She arranged for specialized counselors who worked with children in high-profile families to be available, and she made sure that Charlotte understood she could discuss her feelings without judgment or pressure to get over it quickly.
The charity event that Marcus had specifically mentioned in his delusions was ultimately held as scheduled, but with significantly enhanced security measures and a reduced guest list. Charlotte attended with her family, demonstrating the resilience and commitment to duty that would characterize her approach to royal responsibilities throughout her life.
Years later, Charlotte would look back on this incident as a pivotal moment in her understanding of what it meant to be a member of the royal family.
The encounter with Marcus Webb had been frightening and traumatic, but it had also revealed her own inner strength and the depth of love and protection that surrounded her.
She learned that while there would always be challenges and occasionally dangerous situations, she was never truly alone in facing them.
The incident also strengthened the bonds between Charlotte and her family members, particularly her relationship with Queen Camilla, who had provided such crucial support during and after the crisis. Camilla's calm presence and wise counsel helped Charlotte process not just the immediate trauma, but also the broader implications for her future life as a public figure.
Most importantly, Charlotte learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to continue serving others even when facing personal risk. This lesson would guide her throughout her life as she grew into her role as a senior member of the royal family, always remembering that her duty was to the people who looked to her family for leadership and inspiration regardless of the personal costs that service might require.